Hello, welcome back. We are in session 7 of our Keystone review. Session 7 is our unit 8, which was theory of evolution. The main ideas for this unit, we've got a large chunk of information covering natural selection and how it can impact the allele frequencies for a population. Also, thinking about supporting evidence for evolution, so the fossil record, anatomical structures, physiological structures, and obviously genetic code. And also for some reason they kind of throw some scientific terms in there. So let's get to it. Let's do it. I've posted some videos for you on natural selection. I hate that I have to be stuck in here. And really, your question for this session was describe how natural selection can impact allele frequencies in a population. So let's get into the practice questions so I don't make a really long video again by accident. Okay. Two closely related shrimp species have habitats and niches that partially overlap. Which factor most likely caused the divergence of the shrimp into separate species? So if you remember the divergence of one species into two separate species that are now chromosomally different from each other, they're no longer considered a species because they can't breed and produce fertile offspring, is caused by a couple different things. Is it reproductive isolation, reduction of food supply, a series of rapid mutations, or a large initial population size? What caused the divergence of their species? Take a moment to think about this using context clues and answer the question in the Ed puzzle. On slideshows, Pamela. Okay. Question number 1, if you selected A, reproductive isolation, you are correct. Shrimp that occupy separate habitats and niches are more likely to reproduce with nearby shrimp, eventually leading to speciation. The food supply reduction would not cause speciation. Mutations accumulate slowly, so that was a trick there. And the initial population size would not cause speciation. So that was a tough one. A was the most correct answer for this guy. All right, here's a picture we did see, an image we did see in our slideshow in Unit 8. This diagram shows the forelimbs of 3 animals. Which statement best describes the bones of the animals? Remember, the word best means some other answer might be sort of correct, but there's one that's better than all of the rest. Which is the best answer? All organisms on Earth have the same bones. Different bones in similar species serve the same function. The species that are the most evolved have the longest bones, or similar bones in different organisms may have different functions. So, structure function question. Think about this for a moment. Answer it in the Ed puzzle. Looking at number 2, there are 2 choices here that are just kind of banana sandwiches. Eliminate choice letter B, and eliminate choice A and choice C. That's just silliness. All organisms on Earth have the same bones. We know that's not true. The species that are the most evolved have the longest bones. That makes no sense. All right, so different bones in similar species serve the same function. When we look at a bat, a cat, and a whale, we are thinking about the function of their forelimbs. Is the function of a whale, a bat, and a cat forelimb all the same? Do these 3 structures do the same job? They do not. So it makes more sense to say that similar bones in different organisms may have different functions. That is what this image is showing us. It is showing us similar bone structures that have different functions. And we're really looking at all of the wrist bones, the structures in the wrist. So very cool. Good question. Number 3. Which statement best describes how geographic isolation can contribute to land animal speciation. Geographic isolation physically separates populations but allows them to interact. Geographic isolation physically separates population and prevents them from interacting. Geographic isolation causes genetic changes in individual organisms but allows them to interact. Geographic isolation causes genetic changes in individual organisms and prevents them from interacting. Pretty easy question here, guys. Use your context clues, take your time, eliminate choices that make no sense. Answer this in the Ed puzzle. If you selected B, that is correct. That makes the most sense. When we have geographic isolation, we're talking about something where, like, the squirrels that were hanging out together and were one species, and then something caused the Grand Canyon, and now there's squirrels on one side of the canyon and another population on the other side. They can't interact with each other anymore. They have different food supplies, they have different selective pressures acting on them, and then over many generations they speciate, they become different species. So a geographic isolation, just how it sounds, you're isolated from other members of the population geographically. You can't get to each other, you can't interact. So that would mean A does not make sense. B is correct. Geographic isolation also is not the thing that causes those genetic changes. That's natural selection. So geographic isolation doesn't have anything to do with causing your genetic changes. So B here is the most correct answer. Number 4, little whale. Vestigial bones. Whales have vestigial femurs and pelvic bones. Which statement explains why the vestigial structures are most likely present in whales? A. Whales evolved over time from ancestors that lived on land. Whales evolved over time from fish species that once lived on land. Hind legs are an adaptation in whales that is selected for as they evolve into land mammals, or hind legs are an evolutionary adaptation observed in whales that walked along the ocean floor. Think about this one. Again, some crazy bananas responses here. Make sure you're eliminating those first, and then we'll rule out the ones that make no sense and try to choose the best answer here. If you selected A, you are correct. A pelvis and femur are evolutionary remnants that indicate whales likely once walked on land. Remember what vestigial structures are. Vestigial structures are leftover structures that kind of give us some clue about an organism's evolutionary past. So seeing these tiny little primitive vestigial pelvic bones doesn't say that this whale used to just like stroll around on the ocean floor. It's left over from an evolutionary past. All right, so that makes the most sense. The other ones really don't make sense. Let's take a look at number 5. Which condition would most likely result in an increase in the phenotypic variation within a population? The variety of food available in the habitat decreases. A mutation leads to individuals with genetic differences. Competition is reduced for all individuals during the winter, or climate remains unchanged in the population's ecosystem. So remember, your phenotype is, we're going back to Unit 6 when we were talking about genetics. Your phenotype is the physical representation of your genetic makeup. So what would cause an increase in variation? Okay, so what would cause a little variation in the population? So instead of having all these, give me an animal, a whole bunch of cats that are black, instead of just black cats, now you see some calico cats and some beige cats and I don't know, gray cats. I don't know why I even picked cats. I don't like cats. But anyhow, we've got phenotypic variation in a population. What might cause that? Think about it for a second. answer it in the Ed puzzle, taking a look at the answer together. If you selected letter B to make the most sense, you are correct. The only thing that's going to change your phenotype is if your genotype changes. And what's going to do that? A mutation. Do that. Let's take a look at number 6. Many scientists have concluded that whales and dolphins have a more recent common ancestor than whales and sharks. Which characteristic most likely allowed scientists to make this conclusion? Their species niche, their predation behavior, their anatomical structures, or their geographic distribution. So when you're thinking about an organism's evolutionary timeline and the branching off of it all, they're saying here that whales and dolphins are a little bit more closely related than whales and sharks. What causes that conclusion? What makes scientists believe this by exploring the whales and dolphins and sharks? What? Think about this for a moment in the Ed puzzle. And if you selected C, their anatomical structures, you are correct. Comparative anatomy has long been used to determine common ancestry among organisms. The other thing you might have thought to yourself is that whales and dolphins are both considered aquatic mammals, whereas sharks are cartilaginous fish. They're true cartilaginous fish. Their bones are made of cartilage. Okay. Did I just not have a number 7 here? All right. Number 8, which statement describes how mutation would most likely affect a population? Genotypic variation would increase. Genotypic variation would decrease. The occurrence of a pre-existing gene would increase, or the occurrence of a pre-existing gene would decrease. Pretty easy here, guys. Think about this for a moment. Answer it on the Ed puzzle. It is number 8. Number 7, make the cut. I don't know what I was thinking. It's okay. The answer to number 8, if you selected A, you are correct. We have a mutation that's going to increase genetic variety in the population, just like we were just talking about with the cats. A mutation comes along, and where you only had black cats like a witch, now you have cats that have different colored fur. That's an increase in genotypic variation. The rest of them just don't make sense. They just don't make sense. Don't pick those other choices. Number 9, a population of squirrels was separated during the formation of the Grand Canyon. See, I wasn't just like making that up. It's a true story. Over time, the squirrels separated by the Grand Canyon walls and the Colorado River became unique species. Which mechanism most likely caused the development of the new species? Habitat preference, increase in gene flow, geographic isolation, or behavioral isolation? Guys, I want you to think about something here. This is an example of how a question that we explored earlier is kind of giving us the answer to a question that we are answering now. This happens on the Keystone exam sometimes. You'll answer number 2 and you're just kind of like taking a guess at it. And then as you're scrolling through and you're answering more questions, you get up to another one and you're like, hey, that reminds me. I was wrong about number 2. And guess what you're allowed to do, supposed to do, encouraged to do? Go back and check your answers. Go back and check your work. This is not a timed test. You have all the time you need to complete it. Might as well do a good job. Might as well do your best. So this is an example of what happens sometimes where a question that comes a little bit later in the test kind of triggers a memory or references some stuff from before. So we are thinking about, which one was it? Geographic isolation can contribute to land animal speciation. Weren't we just talking about that in question number 3? We were. So hey, that's going to help us out with question number 9. Think about the answer for a second. In the Ed puzzle, if you selected C, geographic isolation, a physical barrier that separates a population and prevents individuals from mating with one another, reduces gene flow, leading to speciation. You are correct. Finally, number 10, a researcher observes two species of frogs in the same area. Both species have a similar diet. One species breeds in fast moving streams, okay, while the other species breeds in ponds. Both species are similar in appearance and have very similar DNA. Which information provides the best evidence that these two species descended from a common ancestor? Their diet, their habitat, their mating behaviors, or their physical characteristics? Take a second. Answer this in the Ed puzzle. If you selected physical characteristics, this is a very similar question to the dolphin and shark and whale question. So if you selected physical characteristics because you know they are directed by inherited information contained in DNA, which provides objective evidence for evolution from a common ancestor, you would be correct. All right, good job today, guys. I hope you're doing well with your Keystone exam review. Ask me if you have any questions. Have a good day. Watch the Ed puzzle till the end.